Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his world die. The massive defense station that had protected his people for 300 years was now nothing but burning metal and gas. Through the viewport, he could see the enemy ships, sleek black vessels, that looked like giant insects crawling across the stars. The Haxor Collective had come to harvest his system. These machines didn't negotiate or show mercy. They simply took what they wanted and left empty worlds behind. Veltar had seen the recordings from other systems they had attacked. Nothing survived their visit. Commander. His communications officer's voice cracked with terror. The young Kelthian's tentacles were shaking so badly he could barely work his controls. The outer colonies, Myria Prime, New Kelth, the mining, Stations, they're all gone silent. Veltar closed all four of his eyes for a moment. Those colonies housed over 2 million people. Families, children, elderly citizens, who had never hurt anyone. All gone in less than 6 hours. Sir, the officer's voice was barely a whisper now. Maybe we should try to surrender, offer them tribute. Our historical archives show some species have survived by no. Veltar's voice was firm. His 4 eyes opened and focused on the tactical display, showing dozens of enemy ships surrounding his homeworld. The Haxor don't accept surrender. They don't want tribute. They want everything. He walked to his command chair, his mind racing. The Kelthian Republic had 12 ships left. 12 ships against over 50 Haxor vessels, each one more advanced than anything his people had ever built. His military academy training told him this was hopeless. But something deeper, something that made him who he was, refused to accept defeat. Open all emergency channels, he ordered. Broadcast on every frequency we know. Send it to every corner of the galaxy. His communications officer looked confused. Sir, what message? Veltar straightened up, thinking of his daughter safe in the underground shelters. Thinking of all the children hiding in fear below. Send our sensor recordings of the attack. Show them what's happening here. Tell them we are the Kelthian Republic, and we die free. Maybe someone out there still remembers what honor means. The officer worked quickly, beaming their desperate plea across the void. The message showed Haxor ships stripping the atmosphere from colony worlds. Showed civilians running for their lives. Showed a small species making their last stand against impossible odds. Most advanced civilizations would ignore the call. The Kelthians were too weak, too poor, too primitive to matter. They had no resources worth fighting for, no strategic value, no powerful allies to anger. But the message traveled far, racing through hyperspace lanes and quantum relays, reaching systems the Kelthians had never even heard of. It reached worlds where beings had forgotten what it meant to fight for strangers. It reached planets where profit mattered more than principles. And on one small blue planet, in a military command center in Seoul, Admiral Lee Day was working late when the alien distress call appeared on his screen. President Kim Hanna had been in countless emergency meetings during her time in office, but none quite like this one. The holographic display in the center of the Seoul command room showed images that made her stomach turn. Alien cities burning. Strange creatures with tentacles carrying what looked like children to safety. Massive black ships raining destruction from the sky. Let me understand this correctly, she said, rubbing her temples. You want to take our entire deep space fleet, travel across half the galaxy, and fight some machine army we've never heard of? To save aliens we've never met? Admiral Lee Day didn't flinch. He was a quiet man, known for thinking before he spoke. His service record was spotless. 22 years in the Earth Defense Force, veteran of the Mars Colony Uprising, the man who had designed their new hyperspace-capable warships. When he spoke, people listened. Madam President, I've watched this message 17 times. These people are facing complete extinction. The Haxor machines don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They consume entire worlds and move on. Defense. Minister Park Soo shook his head vigorously. This is insane. We just finished building our first real space navy. 18 ships. That's all we have. What if Earth gets attacked while our fleet is gone? By who? Li Day asked calmly. Our intelligence reports show no immediate threats to our system. These ships were built to project Earth's power beyond our borders. This is exactly what they're for. To protect Earth's interests, Park Soo shot back. Not to fight other people's wars. The room fell silent except for the hum of computers. Through the massive windows, they could see Earth's pride, the new battleship Seoul's glory. The cruiser, New Busan, destroyers and frigates that represented decades of human engineering and determination. Ships that had never seen real combat. Captain Han Ju had been quiet until now. She was young for her rank, barely 35, but she had earned her position commanding the experimental hyperspace trials. Her ships had pushed further into unknown space than any human vessels before. Permission to speak freely, Madam President. Hannah nodded. I've seen war, Han Ju said simply. I was on Titan during the corporate conflicts. I've watched children die while adults argued about politics and profit margins. These alien kids in the message, they look scared, just like human kids would be. She stood up, her voice gaining strength. We have the fastest ships in human history. We have weapons that can punch through any armor we know about. We have crews trained for exactly this kind of deep space mission. What we don't have is a reason to look at ourselves in the mirror. If we let an entire species die when we could have helped. The silence stretched longer this time. Financial advisor Choi Min cleared his throat nervously. The cost alone would be enormous. Fuel, supplies, potential ship losses, ... What's the cost of living with ourselves afterward? Li Day asked quietly. President Kim Hannah looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leadership. Some showed fear, others calculation. But in Li Day's eyes, she saw something that reminded her why she had entered politics in the first place. The simple belief that doing right mattered more than doing what was easy. Admiral, how quickly can your fleet be ready? 3 hours. Madam President. We've been running deep space readiness drills all month. Kim Hannah took a deep breath. Then go. Bring our people home safely. But first, bring those aliens some hope. The space around Kelthia Prime looked like hell itself. Massive black Haxor ships hung in orbit like metal vultures, their energy beams carving deep wounds into the planet's surface. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were being reduced to ash and rubble. The planet's defense grid was already gone, leaving nothing between the machines and millions of innocent lives. Commander. Veltar gripped his command chair as another shockwave rocked. His damaged flagship. His tactical displays showed the grim reality. 47 Haxor vessels against his remaining 8 ships. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution. Sir, massive hyperspace distortions detected. His sensor operator called out. All 4. Eyes wide with confusion. Multiple ships dropping out of jump space, bearing 27. Veltar's heart sank. More enemies. Had the Haxor called in reinforcements to finish them faster? But the sensor readings didn't match anything in their database. These ships were smaller than Haxor vessels, sleeker with unusual energy signatures. Then, something impossible happened. The unknown ships immediately opened fire on the Haxor fleet. What? Veltar stared at his displays in shock. Who are they attacking? Why aren't they hailing the Haxor first? His communications officer was frantically working his controls. Sir, I'm detecting transmission attempts. The newcomers are trying to contact us, but their language protocols are ... strange. Through the static and interference of battle, a voice crackled across the bridge speakers. The words were clumsy, mispronounced, clearly spoken by someone learning Kelthian from a computer program. Earth Fleet ... Here to help. We ... protect your people, Earth. Veltar had never heard the name, but these mysterious newcomers weren't just talking. They were fighting with a fury that defied all logic. Captain Baymin's destroyer, the Inchin, was outnumbered 3-1 as it engaged a massive Haxor harvester ship. The harvester was 10 times larger, designed to strip entire continents of their resources. By any reasonable calculation, the human ship should have retreated. Instead, Baymin did something that broke every rule of space combat. She pointed her ship directly at the enemy and pushed her engines to maximum power. "Captain, what are you doing?" her weapons officer shouted. "Saving lives," Baymin replied calmly, watching the distance close rapidly. Below them, the Haxor harvester was preparing to drain the water from Kelfia's largest ocean, which would kill over 3 million civilians living on the coastal cities. The Inchin struck the harvester at full speed. Both ships vanished in a brilliant explosion that lit up half the star system. The shockwave knocked nearby Haxor ships off course and completely disrupted their attack pattern. On his bridge, Veltar watched in stunned silence. They killed themselves to save our people. Who does that? His tactical officer's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, the other human ships are doing the same thing. They're attacking targets 3 times their size, without any regard for their own safety." Across the battlefield, human vessels were engaging in combat tactics that the Haxor's logical programming simply couldn't understand. The machines were designed to fight rational opponents who valued their own survival above all else. But these humans were different. Captain Oyan's cruiser was badly damaged, but instead of retreating to safety, she positioned her ship between a Haxor dreadnought and a civilian evacuation convoy. Her ship took massive damage, but every minute she held that position meant another 1,000 Kelthian refugees escaped. "These beings fight like they have no fear," Veltar whispered, watching the impossible battle unfold. "Like they care more about strangers than their own lives." For the first time in days, Commander Veltar felt something he had thought was lost forever: hope. Lieutenant Commander Ojin had been in tough spots before, but nothing like this. His tactical display looked like a nightmare. Red dots representing Haxor ships completely surrounded the small cluster of blue dots that marked what remained of Earth's fleet. The numbers were brutal and getting worse by the minute. "Sir, we just lost the Guangzhou," reported Ensign Choi Na, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. Captain Lee's ship took a direct hit from 3 dreadnoughts. No survivors. Jin closed his eyes for just a moment. Lee had been his classmate at the academy, a good man, with 2 young kids back on Earth. Now he was gone, along with his entire crew of 300. "That leaves us 11 ships against 57 hostiles," Choi Na continued, updating her display. "Sir, the math is impossible. We're outnumbered more than 5-1. Jin looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all young, most of them on their first deep space mission. They had joined Earth's Navy to explore the stars and protect their home, not to die fighting machines in a war that wasn't theirs. But none of them looked like they wanted to run. "Then we'll have to be 5 times better than them," Jin said quietly. 5 times smarter, 5 times faster, 5 times more determined. The battle had turned into a desperate running fight. The human ships were faster than the Haxor vessels, but they couldn't run forever. Every time they tried to escape, the machines would redirect their attack toward the helpless Kelthian civilian ships struggling to evacuate their dying world. Captain Wan Hei's cruiser, the Daejin, was barely holding together. Her main engines were dead, her weapons systems running on backup power, and her hull had more holes than metal. But she refused to withdraw. "Captain, we need to fall back," her engineering officer pleaded over the comm. "The ship can't take much more punishment." Wan Hei watched her tactical display, where dozens of small dots represented Kelthian refugee vessels packed with families fleeing their homeworld. 3 massive Haxor ships were moving to intercept them, and her crippled cruiser was the only thing standing in their way. "No," she said firmly. "Those civilians won't make it without cover. Route all remaining power to weapons. Everything we've got." Her ship shuddered under enemy fire, but her guns kept blazing. Every shot she fired meant another few minutes for the refugees to escape. When her main batteries finally died, she switched to secondary weapons. When those failed, she used her point defense guns. "Captain, total system failure imminent," her chief engineer reported. "We're going to lose life support in 3 minutes." Wanhei smiled grimly. Through her viewports, she could see the last refugee convoy jumping to hyperspace, their ships disappearing in flashes of blue light. Thousands of Kelthian families were safe now. "All hands, abandon ship," she ordered. "Set collision course for the nearest Haxor vessel." Her crew evacuated quickly, but Wanhei stayed at her post. She watched the enemy ships growing larger in her viewport, then activated her ship's self-destruct. The Daejeon's explosion took out 2 Haxor fighters and damaged a third, buying even more time for the evacuation. On the bridge of his flagship, Seoul's Glory, Admiral Lee Dae tracked every ship, every life, every desperate move in this impossible battle. He had started with 18 ships and 3,000 crew members. Now, he had 11 ships and barely 2,000 people left, but the Kelthian evacuation was 70% complete. Millions of innocent lives had been saved because his people were willing to die for strangers they had never met. "Admiral, incoming priority transmission from Earth Command," his communications officer reported. Lee Dae shook his head. "Not now. We have work to finish here." Engineer Ante was knee-deep in twisted metal and sparking wires when he made the discovery. That would change everything. His ship, the frigate Busan, had taken a direct hit from a Haxor plasma cannon, and he was desperately trying to keep life support running when something strange caught his attention. "That's weird," he muttered, pulling up readings on his damaged tablet. The electromagnetic interference patterns weren't random like they should be after battle damage. They were organized, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Tae had always been curious about how things worked. As a kid, he took apart every electronic device in his house just to see the pieces inside. That curiosity had made him one of Earth's best engineers, and right now it was showing him something incredible. "They're all connected," he whispered, staring at the data streams flowing across his screen. "The Haxor ships, they're not fighting as individuals. They're sharing information through some kind of quantum network." His hands moved quickly across his controls, tracing the communication patterns. Every Haxor ship was constantly talking to every other ship, sharing targeting data, tactical information, even damage reports. It was like they had one giant brain spread across 50 different bodies. But if they all shared one brain, that meant they all shared one weakness. "Bridge. This is engineering," Tae called urgently. "I need to speak to Admiral Lee Dae immediately." 5 minutes later, Tae was explaining his discovery to the Admiral over a crackling comlink. "Sir, it's like a spider web. Cut one strand and the web gets weak. But if you can destroy the center, the whole thing falls apart." Lee Dae's voice was tired but focused. "What do you need?" "A ship that can get close to their command vessel," Tae explained. "That big mothership in the center of their formation. If we can overload their quantum hub with enough electromagnetic interference, we can blind their entire fleet." There was silence on the come for a moment. They all knew what this meant. The Haxor command ship was surrounded by dozens of smaller vessels, all of them bristling with weapons. Any ship that got close enough to cause that kind of interference would never make it back. "I'll do it," came a quiet voice over the channel. Captain Seo Bin's frigate, the Olsen, was barely holding together after the last engagement. Half her crew was wounded, her engines were running at 60%, and her hull looked like it had been through a meat grinder. "Captain, your ship is in no condition for an attack run," Admiral Lee Dae protested. "That's exactly why it's perfect," Siobin replied calmly. They won't expect a crippled ship to be a threat. I can get close before they realize what's happening. For the next hour, every human ship with spare explosives transferred their entire supply to the Olsen. Nuclear warheads, plasma charges, even the emergency self-destruct devices from escape pods. Everything went into Siobin's ship. By the time they were finished, the frigate was basically a flying bomb. Captain Tay's voice crackled over the comm as he made final adjustments. To the explosive array, you know this is a one-way trip, right? Siobin was quiet for a moment, looking at the photo on her command console. Her parents back on Earth, proud and smiling at her graduation from the Naval Academy. Yeah, I know, but those Kelthian kids deserve a chance to grow up, just like I did. Her ship accelerated toward the massive Haxor mothership, weaving between enemy fire with damaged engines and sheer determination. As she got closer, the defensive fire grew heavier, but she kept going. For people we've never met, she whispered, arming every explosive device on her ship. The Olsen struck the Haxor mothership and detonated in a blast that could be seen from 3 star systems away. The quantum network that had coordinated the entire Haxor fleet overloaded instantly, sending cascade failures through every connected ship. Suddenly, the methodical, perfectly coordinated enemy became 50 confused individual vessels, each one fighting alone and blind. And that's when humanity struck back with everything they had, in the chaos of battle. Heroes weren't born in grand speeches or medal ceremonies. They emerged in quiet moments of choice, when ordinary people decided that someone else's life mattered more than their own safety. Medic Koyan had never seen an alien before 3 days ago. Now she was elbowed deep in green blood, trying to save the life of a Kelthian child whose parents had been killed in the orbital bombardment. The transport ship New Busan shook violently as another Haxor plasma blast struck nearby. But Koyon's hands never wavered. Please hold still, she whispered to the frightened alien child, even though she knew he couldn't understand her words. The boy had 4 arms and tentacles where humans had hair, but his tears looked exactly like a human child's tears. The makeshift medical bay was nothing more than a cargo hold filled with wounded survivors. Koyun had been working for 18 straight hours, moving from patient to patient without rest. Her medical supplies had run out hours ago, so she was using torn clothing for bandages and jury-rigged equipment that should have been replaced years ago. "Doctor, we're taking heavy fire," called the ship's captain over the intercom. "You might want to move to the emergency shelters." Koyan looked around at the dozens of wounded Kelthians under her care. Most were civilians, teachers, shopkeepers, children who had never hurt anyone. They looked at her with their large, trusting eyes, depending on her to keep them alive. "I'm staying with my patients," she replied simply, then went back to work, stitching up a wound on an elderly tentacle. High above the planet, pilot Lim Du was having the worst day of his military career. His fighter, the Tiger's Claw, had been held together with spare parts and determination for the past 6 hours. The left engine was dead, the right engine was making sounds no engine should make, and his weapon systems had failed completely an hour ago. But his job wasn't fighting anymore. It was saving lives. "Refugee Convoy Delta 7, this is Tiger's Claw." He radioed to a group of civilian ships trying to escape the planet. "You've got 3 Haxor interceptors on your tail. Change course to bearing 180 Mark 5. I'll try to draw them off." Lim Du knew his crippled fighter couldn't outrun healthy enemy ships, but he could be a distraction. He pushed his dying engine as hard as it would go, firing flares and broadcasting on all frequencies to get the Haxor's attention. It worked. The 3 enemy ships broke off their pursuit of the civilians and came after him instead. "Come on, you metal monsters," he muttered, leading them away from the refugee convoy. "Chase me instead." His right engine finally gave up completely, leaving him drifting in space with no power and no weapons. Through his canopy, He could see a massive Haxor bomber moving toward the planet's surface, where millions of Kelthian civilians were still trapped in underground shelters. Limdu looked at the photo tape to his instrument panel, his little sister at her high school graduation, smiling and proud that her big brother was protecting Earth. She would understand what he had to do next. He used his fighter's emergency thrusters to point his nose directly at the bomber, then activated his ejection seats, explosive bolts, not to escape, but to give his ship one final burst of speed. The Tiger's claw struck the Haxor bomber just as it was preparing to attack the civilian shelters. Both ships vanished in a brilliant explosion, but the shelters remained safe. Deep in the engine room of the cruiser Soul's Pride, Chief Petty Officer Nam Su was performing miracles with duct tape and prayer. The ship's main reactor had been damaged in the first hour of battle. The backup generators were failing one by one, and half the crew was already dead. But the life support systems were still running. And as long as they were running, the 800 Kelthian refugees in the cargo holds would stay alive. "Chief, we're losing power to decks 7 through 12, reported his assistant, Petty Officer Jang Ki. Nam Su wiped sweat from his forehead and grabbed another bundle of spare cables. "Then we'll reroute power from the weapons systems. We don't need guns anymore. We need to keep these people breathing." For 12 hours, Nam Su worked without stopping. When official spare parts ran out, he improvised with pieces from his own toolkit. When those ran out, he started cannibalizing non-essential systems. He turned the ship's coffee makers into power conduits and used medical equipment to boost the air recycling systems. "Why are we doing this?" Jang Ki asked during a brief break. "These aliens aren't even our people." Nam Su looked up at the ceiling, knowing that hundreds of frightened families were huddled in the darkness above them, trusting him to keep them alive. "Because someone has to," he said simply, then went back to rewiring another power coupling. These weren't the kind of heroes who got their names in history books. They were ordinary people who made extraordinary choices when it mattered most. They fought not for medals or glory, but because they couldn't live with themselves if they did anything else. Captain Yang Wu had been saving his last 4 torpedoes for this exact moment. His destroyer, the Mokpo, was running on emergency power, and held together by little more than hope and determination. But the massive Haxor command ship was finally within range, its shields weakened by hours of brutal fighting. "All tubes loaded and ready, Captain," reported his weapons officer. Despite the fact that half the torpedo bay was flooded with coolant from a damaged line, Yang Wu watched his tactical display, timing his shot perfectly. The enemy ship was turning, trying to retreat, now that their network was failing and their coordination was broken, but they weren't fast enough. "Fire all tubes," he ordered quietly. 4 bright streaks of light raced across the darkness of space, each torpedo carrying humanity's determination to see this fight through to the end. The first torpedo struck the command ship's weakened shields, causing them to flicker and fail. The second and third punched through the hull armor like it was paper. The fourth found something vital deep inside the enemy vessel. The explosion was spectacular. Blue and white flames erupted from the massive ship as its power core overloaded, lighting up half the star system. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull as internal systems failed in cascade. Within minutes, the pride of the Haxor Collective was nothing but expanding debris and cooling gas. Across the battlefield, something extraordinary happened. The remaining Haxor ships, no longer receiving orders from their command network, began to withdraw. These machines that had seemed unstoppable just hours ago now fled like frightened animals, their harvesting operation abandoned and their perfect coordination shattered. Commander Veltar watched from the bridge of his battered flagship as the last enemy vessels disappeared into hyperspace. The silence that followed was almost overwhelming after hours of constant battle noise. His homeworld was safe, his people would survive, but the price paid by these mysterious humans was almost Too much to comprehend. Sir, the human admiral is requesting permission to come aboard, reported his communications officer. Veltar nodded slowly. Grant permission. These beings have earned the right to speak face to face. When Admiral Lee Day stepped onto the Kelthian bridge 20 minutes later, Veltar was struck by how ordinary the human looked. Lee Day was not tall or imposing, like the warriors in Kelthian legends. His uniform was torn and stained with what looked like his own blood. His face showed the exhaustion of someone who had carried an impossible burden and somehow survived. But his eyes held something Veltar had never seen before. Not the cold calculation of a professional soldier, not the wild fire of a berserker, but something deeper. Something that spoke of choices, made not for personal gain, but simply because they were right. Admiral Veltar began, struggling to find words in the human's language. Your fleet. When you arrived, you had 18 ships. Now, 6 ships remain operational, Lee Day finished quietly. We lost 12 vessels and over 1,500 crew members. The numbers hit Veltar like a physical blow. These humans had lost 2/3 of their fleet, saving a world they had never seen, for people they had never met. I must ask, Veltar said, his 4 eyes focusing intently on the human's face. Why? Your species owed us nothing. We had no treaty, no alliance, no trade agreements. You could have ignored our call, and no one would have blamed you. Why did your people sacrifice so much for strangers? Lee Day was quiet for a long moment, looking out through the viewport at the debris field that had once been a Haxor fleet. Veltar could see human rescue ships moving among the wreckage, searching for survivors, not just human survivors, but Kelthian survivors as well. Because you called for help, Lee Day said simply, turning back to face the alien commander, and we could answer. The simplicity of the response stunned Veltar. No talk of strategic advantage, no mention of future repayment, no complex political calculations. Just the basic recognition that someone needed help, and they had the ability to provide it. Your species, Veltar said slowly, you are not like the others in this galaxy. Lee Day smiled tiredly. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. As Veltar watched this exhausted human admiral coordinate rescue operations for both species equally, he felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what was possible in the universe. Perhaps honor and compassion weren't extinct. After all, perhaps there were still beings who believed that doing the right thing was more important than doing the profitable thing. For the first time in years, Commander Veltar felt hope for the future. The news traveled faster than the fastest starship, across thousands of star systems and countless alien civilizations. Beings gathered around their communication devices to watch something that shouldn't have been possible. Battle recordings from the Kelthian system played over and over again on galactic news networks, showing human ships throwing themselves at enemies 10 times their size. In the crystal spires of the Vraxian Empire's capital world, Supreme Chancellor Mordok stood before a massive holographic display, showing the tactical analysis of the battle. His 6 arms gestured in agitation as he reviewed the data for the 10th time. Explain this to me again, he demanded of his military advisor, a seasoned general who had commanded fleets for over 3 centuries. These humans had 18 ships. The Haxor Collective had over 50 vessels, including dreadnoughts and their command mothership. Yet somehow, these primitives won. General Kethver's mandibles clicked nervously. Yes, Supreme Chancellor, but they didn't win through superior firepower or advanced technology. They won through. He paused, struggling to find the right words. ... Complete disregard for their own survival. Mordok's primary eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Watch this segment. Kethver activated a recording showing Captain Baymin's destroyer ramming the Haxor Harvester. This human captain could have retreated. Her ship was outgunned and outmatched. Instead, she deliberately crashed into the enemy vessel, killing herself and her entire crew to save Kelthian civilians she had never met. The recording played in slow motion, showing the moment of impact and the massive explosion that followed. Murdoch watched in stunned silence. Our strategic computers have been analyzing human combat behavior for days, Cuthbert continued. They cannot create predictive models because human actions contradict every principle of logical warfare. They prioritize saving enemy civilians over preserving their own military assets. They sacrifice expensive warships to protect worthless refugee transports. They fight harder when outnumbered rather than retreating to fight another day. Murdoch esped. 4 hands clenched into fists. The Varaxian Empire had received the same distress call from the Kelthians that Earth had received, but they had dismissed it as unworthy of attention. The Kelthians had no valuable resources, no strategic importance, no ability to repay military assistance. What does our intelligence network tell us about these humans? Murdoch asked. Very little, Supreme Chancellor. They only achieved interstellar flight 50 years ago. Their technology is generations behind ours. They have no major trading partners, no military alliances, no galactic political influence. By every measure that matters, they should be completely insignificant. Except they just destroyed a Haxor fleet that we wouldn't have dared to challenge, Murdoch muttered. On Earth, President Kim Hanna stood before the Global Council in Seoul, looking out at representatives from every nation on the planet. The communication array behind her was constantly chiming with incoming messages from across the galaxy, more than had been received in the entire history of human spaceflight. Madam President, said her chief of staff, we're receiving diplomatic overtures from 47 different alien civilizations. The Altarian Trade Federation wants to discuss economic partnerships. The Zephyrian Republic is offering military alliance treaties, and the Nexus Consortium is, well, they're demanding we explain our aggressive expansion into their sphere of influence. Kim Hanna shook her head. Aggressive expansion? We answered a distress call. That's not how they see it, apparently. There are also several communications that could be interpreted as threats. The hegemony of Suns wants assurance that we won't interfere in their territorial disputes. The Corporate Systems Alliance is demanding we register our military capabilities with their oversight committee. Through the tall windows of the council chamber, Kim Hanna could see the lights of Seoul stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, families were gathering for dinner. Children were playing in parks. Students were studying for exams. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their actions in a distant star system had suddenly made them the most talked about species in the galaxy. Schedule a planetary broadcast for tomorrow evening, she said firmly. Every nation, every language, every communication channel we have. 24 hours later, President Kim Hanna stood before cameras that would transmit her words to billions of humans and potentially trillions of alien beings throughout the galaxy. To the people of Earth, and to anyone else who might be listening, she began, her voice calm but resolute. 3 weeks ago, we received a cry for help from people we had never met, in a star system we had never visited, facing an enemy we had never encountered. We responded not because we expected reward, not because we sought recognition, and not because we wanted to make a statement to the galaxy. She paused, looking directly into the camera. We responded because it was the right thing to do. Because when someone calls for help, and you have the power to answer, you answer. This will never change, regardless of what others might think of us. We are who we are, and we will not apologize for caring about the lives of strangers. Across the galaxy, beings watched and wondered if they had just witnessed the emergence of something entirely new in their ancient universe. Admiral Lee Day walked onto the bridge of the Harmony and felt the same sense of wonder he experienced every morning. The ship was unlike anything that had ever existed in galactic history, a perfect blend of human engineering and Kelthian biotechnology, crewed by both species working side by side as equals. "Good morning, Admiral," called Captain Moonray from the command station. The Kelthian officer's tentacles moved gracefully as she coordinated the morning shift change, her 4 eyes tracking multiple displays simultaneously. A year ago, Li Day had never seen an alien. Now, Moonray was one of his most trusted friends, and his second in command. "Status report, Captain," Li Day replied, settling into his chair. Through the viewport, he could see the blue swirl of hyperspace streaming past as they traveled between star systems on patrol. Communications Officer Zhang Yu, a young human who had learned to speak fluent Kelthian, looked up from her station. "Sir, we're receiving routine check-ins from the refugee settlements we established last month. The Andronian families are adapting well to their new colony world, and the Theruvian survivors have started their first harvest." Li Day nodded with satisfaction. The Harmony wasn't just a warship, it was a rescue vessel, a hospital ship, a construction platform, and sometimes a mobile city for refugees who had lost everything. In the past year, it had become the most famous ship in the galaxy, though not for the reasons most vessels achieved fame. Admiral Moonray's voice carried a note of urgency. "We're receiving an emergency transmission. Priority 1 distress call." The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of a being Li Day didn't recognize, some kind of insectoid species with compound eyes and delicate crystalline features. The alien was clearly terrified, speaking rapidly in a language the computer was struggling to translate. "Computer analysis," Li Day ordered. "The transmission originates from the Polaran system, approximately 6 light-years from our current position," the ship's AI reported in its calm voice. The speaker identifies himself as Hive Singer, Zeke H, of the Polaran Collective. His people are under attack by what he describes as Void Raiders, ships that appear to be pirates or mercenaries operating advanced stealth technology. Zhang Yu's fingers flew over her console as she worked to improve the translation. "Sir, I'm getting clearer readings now. He's saying the raiders appeared 3 days ago and have already destroyed 2 of their agricultural platforms. The people are a peaceful species. They have no military defenses." Li Day felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was the 17th time in the past year that Earth's forces had been called to help strangers in distress. Each mission had been dangerous, each one had cost human lives, and each one had been absolutely necessary. "Captain Moonray, how many refugees are we currently carrying?" he asked. 437 beings from 6 different species," she replied immediately. "Mostly families with children. Should we drop them at the nearest safe system before engaging the raiders?" Li Day considered the options. The smart military choice would be to offload the civilians first, ensuring their safety before entering a combat zone. But that would take at least 2 days, and the Polarans might not have 2 days. No, he decided. The Polarans need help now. We'll just have to be extra careful. Around the bridge, both human and Kelthian crew members began their pre-battle preparations with the efficiency born of experience. They had fought together, bled together, and saved countless lives together. Species differences had become irrelevant in the face of shared purpose. "Sir," reported Chief Engineer Ko Hai, her voice crackling over the intercom from the engine room, "our Kelthian bioneural processors are fully integrated with our quantum drives. We can achieve maximum combat speed whenever you're ready." Li Day smiled slightly. A year ago, human technology and Kelthian biotechnology had seemed completely incompatible. Now, the combination of both had created ships faster and more capable than anything either species could have built alone. "All stations, prepare for combat acceleration," he announced. "We're going to help some people who need it." As the Harmony dropped out of hyperspace above the embattled Polaran system, Li Day reflected on how much had changed. Humanity had started this journey as unknown primitives on the edge of galactic civilization. Now, they were something entirely new, not conquerors or diplomats or traitors, but simply the people you called when the impossible needed to be done. "Raiders identified, sir," reported Moonray. 12 ships, heavy assault configuration. There, attacking civilian targets. Then let's remind them that's not acceptable, Li Day said quietly. All hands, this is the Admiral. We have people to save. The Harmony raced toward battle once again, carrying hope to strangers who had nowhere else to turn.